There is only one tool that it doesn't matter if you are a power tool woodworker, a hand tool woodworker, or a hybrid, that just everyone has to master. And that's what we're going to discuss today. You know, there are a lot of really good woodworkers out there that kind of specialize in one aspect of woodworking and really very rarely dabble in the other area. And I read a really good article a few weeks ago from, on Christopher Schwarz's blog that one of the best woodworkers he knows admitted that he felt like a fraud. And, you know, I think a lot of us are like that. We see certain aspects of woodworking that we just can't grasp or don't have the skill to do very well. But there's one skill that I find it doesn't matter who the woodworker is, they've pretty much mastered, and that's using a chisel. I mean, the chisel seems to be the foundation for everything we use, so getting some good practice, some good hand skills, mastering a chisel is one of the first things any woodworker needs to learn, because it applies to so much. And that's what we're going to be discussing today, the hand skills of using a chisel. Now, you've probably heard me say this many times in the past. A chisel is a two-handed tool. You never use a chisel with only one hand on a tool. That's the easiest way to hurt yourself. If you've got both hands on either the chisel or another hand on another tool, like a mallet, it is a very safe tool. Just don't do the, kamikaze, it's two-handed use, but that's no good. Okay? So, both hands are generally going to be on the chisel for most of our joinery work, unless you're really needing to power through it. Now, when you're using a chisel with both hands, one hand is either going to be acting as a brace, a pivot point, or a fence, while the other one is generally going to be providing propulsion unless you're using it as a pivot point, and that will also control direction. And if you break down your tool use to those four aspects, brace, fence, pivot point, or propulsion, you'll be able to understand most of the uses of a chisel. Now, when I'm talking about a chisel, I'm basically going to be using these terms: the cutting edge, the bevel, the ferrule, and the handle. Okay? I call this one thing right here the bevel, not the full bevel right there. Just that one corner. And that's mainly because I'm a wood turner also, and it's just the term we use there. Now, when you're using a chisel, you generally want to have the work secured somehow. And we use hold-fast clamps, you use a bench hook or anything like that to immobilize the work. I've even been known to lean on it and use my body weight to chiseling it. But for this small thing, I'm just going to use a bench hook. Now, chopping is a task that you do quite a bit when you're using a chisel. It's like one of the key tool aspects of the tool use. And if you have a knife line, it makes lining up the blade a lot easier. That's one reason why I don't like using a pencil line, because I can't feel it. Listen. It just clicks right in there. Now, I do know a lot of people that seem to hold the chisel by the handle, and calling this a handle is kind of a disservice to the new woodworkers, because most of the time you really do need to be holding it down like a pencil if you're going to be doing any chopping, because it's easy to find that line over and over and over. Even back here, when you have a knife line, you can feel it click in, but it's a lot harder to control something out here. That's kind of why we write with a pencil this way and not this way. But the problem comes when you're using a pencil line, because you don't have that recess. And if you're holding it back here, trying to line it up, getting it just in, there's a reason why you end up with those jagged lines instead of a nice straight line. Hold it down close, and then when you need to walk it, you kind of walk it to the line. And what I mean is using either corner as you're coming up to it. You kind of pivot off of one, and you can kind of get closer and closer and closer until you get right on that line. It gives you a lot more control, but you can only have that control if your hand is down close and you're using it like a pencil. Put one side into the old cut, and then you can walk the other side up to that line, and you will make a nice straight cut. But I want you to analyze what's actually happening here. I have one hand on the material, the other hand controlling the direction as I walk it up to that line, get it right in, but the other hand stays on the material and starts acting like a fence so that the chisel will not move. So remember, it acts as a fence, a pivot point, or a brace. So I guess you could call this, it's bracing it so it won't move anywhere else. Now I know a lot of people are concerned about actually hitting this, but understand your mallet's really big and it's pretty easy to grasp, almost blinded, the end of a handle. And that's all you're really doing when you're doing this kind of action. It's just a light chop when you're doing joinery. So you understand, the control happens down closer to the edge, because that's what's doing the work, and you want to be as close to that to gain control, and you want to be touching the tool as much as you can in addition to the work. So it's 2 reference points. And that's a theme you're going to find out quite a bit. You're going to be touching a lot when you're working a chisel. Right now, I'm going to pare out what I've just chopped out, just a little bit, just to demonstrate it. And what's going to happen? One hand's going to control direction, and it's going to become a brace, or a fence to slide on. The other hand will provide propulsion. And then I will utilize all my fingers along with this base to extend that flatness out. So I come over, I put my hand underneath it. I'm going to back this up to the edge. So what's going to happen is I'm going to put my thumb on top, close to the edge to gain that control. My bottom fingers are coming up underneath it. And notice how they spread out down the blade. That way they can extend that fence, and the longer you have physical contact, you'll be able to tell if you're raising and lowering it by feel. What happens? My thumb is going to be pressing against the fence, just like on your table saw. A fence controls the direction and the flatness of it. Extend those fingers out, and just a nice forward press. And that's all it is. Now once I get past here, my thumb is pressing down pretty hard because I want this to register. I've already created a flatness on there to register, and I can come back through and come down and take that nice shaving all the way across. And FYI, generally it's nice to angle up until you get to your depth, and then you kind of lower your depth as you come down, taking longer and longer strokes, and that will give you a nice flat base. But notice my hand position. Lots of fingers touching, lots of pressure here, lots of pressure here, lots of contact to gain the chisel control. Now what happens if you're chopping something like a dovetail off the end grain? Well, same exact thing. I like to stand sideways because it's very easy to tell if I'm perpendicular this way compared to this way. Stand to the side, come to your edge, but notice once again, I have my thumb on the back pressing down against the fence, which is my fingers. I come over, I lift it up, I hold it down low. Easy to tell. Drop it into one side, bring it down to your line, and chop. And you can chop straight down just by eyeball here. Very, very simple. But I'm holding it like a pencil, lots of pressure, my wrist acting as the fence to control it from tipping one way or the other. Also, the wrist is on the hand, on the work, to brace it. Another example, many of y'all see me cut my bevels on the side. Well, if I just press straight across, I'm probably going to get some tear out. It doesn't, I've got a really sharp blade right now. So what a lot of times I will do is I will come over, skew the blade so it's going off, and then I can use my wrist and stuff to skewer aside. Skew it sideways. Notice you get those curly Q cuts. But once again, the wrist is down here. I've actually got somewhat of a pivot point and a slide going on at the same time. So you can get nice shavings. Now, if I did not have my wrist down here, this is very hard to control. I'm going deeper there where I don't want to. I put the wrist down, I can pivot and slide off of that wrist. See the difference? Another common thing is cutting grooves. And this is a situation where you are going to use a pivot point, your lower finger, a pivot point, the bevel, and use your thumb to control it. So if I place my finger right here and I want to begin a groove in the middle of the board and then work my way back, which is how you get a nice straight groove, well, I can put my finger down, press my finger here, and use that bevel to ride. And the farther I extend it out, see, it scoops the wood out. And then I can work my way back and get deeper and deeper and deeper in any groove I have. And this is how I do a lot of my 1/4 inch grooves, because now all of a sudden I have a lip that a nice drawer bottom would fall into. But in that situation, I was pivoting off that bevel right there, and the farther I extended out, that would lift the blade up. So it scooped it up. Pivoted off here amplifies that scoop. So I know I'm not just going to dive down into the wood and just have it break off like that. You can use the same technique if you're trying to clean stuff out and want to get rid of a lot of waste material at the same time. Once again, thumb on top, but this time I'm going to use that bevel as kind of a fence to keep the angle. I'm not lifting it down, I'm maintaining the angle across a cut. And then you can re-flatten it out. So we've worked across the grain, we've worked with the grain. Now let's work on some end grain. A lot of people will come over to end grain of like pine. This is just white pine, very, very soft, and kind of test their chisel sharpness. And mine's getting a little bit dull because you can see a little bit tear out right there. But one way to lower tear out is to lower the cutting angle. And notice I'm wiggling my way through to add a little power. I'm actually making one side of the blade a pivot point and rotating into it like a guillotine coming through. And if you can hit wood at an angle, all of a sudden, versus going straight into it, I'm getting some tear out. But if I can somehow come at it at an angle and skewer my way across, that tear out will go away. I can take it off. Because when you're moving wood across a blade at an angle, in effect it's lowering the cutting angle of the blade. It's kind of like when you go skiing. If you go straight down the hill, you're taking whatever angle the hill is at. But if you cut across the hill sideways, you actually aren't going as steep downhill, so your speed's a little bit slower and you don't run off a cliff and turn into a rolling snowball. But notice I'm using a pivoting action and coming across my way, and notice how much smoother the finish is here compared to the tear out filled section right here when I was just coming straight in at it. So what am I doing? I'm turning my hand into a pivot point using the back, so it's pivoting off my hand right there, keeping my fingers down on the top to maintain pressure, maintain flatness, and then using the back of the handle to torque it around. And you can really get a nice cut on end grain, even with a dull chisel, doing that, because you've lowered that theoretical angle that you're, well, not theoretical, you've lowered the angle you're using so much. So next time you're out in the shop working with your chisel, I want you to think about those concepts. I will tell you, the more contact you have with the chisel and with the work, the more control you're going to have as you use it. Because of today's subject, I thought it would be a smart thing to talk about another one of my favorite tools. But before we get there, if you'd like this video, please do me a favor. Like, favorite, subscribe, do all those social medias. And if you get a chance, visit my website, wortheffort.com, where I write a blog. I just uploaded another article yesterday on teaching dovetails and the importance of the peg. I also have an online store where I sell my own woodworking and some shop-made tools, which I have some new models coming up pretty soonly, and I hope to have another batch of my dovetail markers out there pretty soon. And as always, those stickers are coming. I just got to save up to order that first batch. Now, if you've been following me for any length of time, you probably already know what my favorite tool is. It's this 1/2-inch chisel. Lee Valley came up with this line of chisels, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, and I bought one, and I've only gotten another 1-inch one other than that so far, but this is my go-to chisel. And I kind of bought it just trusting the Veritas brand name. But when I got it, there were so many things about it that I just fell in love with. The steel on this thing, it is very easy to sharpen, and a lot of people were concerned because they were touting how long the edge life was on it, that it would just be very hard to sharpen. Basically, the harder the steel, it will maintain its edge longer, but it becomes impossible to resharpen. Well, this is just as easy for me to sharpen as a high carbon 01 tool steel blade, but it holds its edge so much longer. And when I say that one, it's like all chisels. You can sharpen it up to 200,000 grit. The first time you shove it through the wood, it's going to dull it. But you get down to that like 95-90% range of sharpness, and most chisels will kind of gradually get duller over time. But this one seems to stay at that sharpness level for a lot longer, and then when it does fail, it fails all at once. So it goes 95, 90, 60. But it takes a long time to get that first 10% gone. Where this chisel, the first chisels I bought, you know, they would get really, really sharp, and then they would dull fairly quickly, that top 10%, and then they would just kind of evenly go down. So by the time it's down in the 50% range, you know, I'd be pressing so hard that it was probably a little bit dangerous, but because the transition was so slow, I didn't realize it was getting dull until I went and sharpened it, and then I realized how much easier it was to push through. The other thing I love about it is the blade shape. Look at how it tapers up quite a bit. Yes, a lot of chisels do have a taper to them, but it's more in the bolster, not in the entire length of the chisel. This chisel is markedly thicker here than down there. But the bolster that they cut goes all the way to the edge. In fact, when I first got it, when I was doing a lot of those sliding actions, I was actually cutting my finger. It was so sharp. So I have actually rolled this over with sandpaper a little bit so I don't slice myself. And that's something I have to do every now and then, because you notice that I do a lot of work on the back of the blade, removing that burr, probably more than most people. So I'll just kind of hit it with like a 400 grit just 1 or 2 times. It just dulls the sides. But because it is so fine, when I'm cutting into those corners of dovetails, I don't bruise the wood. Where this one right here has a very large bolster on the side. Can you see that? Well, that up in here, once I get that portion in, that metal has to go somewhere. And generally it just kind of squares off the corners of my dovetail. So you can always tell somebody who's cutting dovetails with a chisel kind of like this, because those bottom corners are kind of squared off. The other thing I like, this is a tanged and socketed chisel. This socket comes down here, so you can really pound on it and it is going to stay tight. Whereas if it was just tanged, there's a chance that, you know, the more you pound it on it, it might split. And that's the danger of tanged chisels. Now, that's not that big a deal for me because it's not very hard to make a new handle on the own. But because of this ferrule and the way it's shaped and coned down, the more you bang on it, it squeezes that bottom end, so it's less likely to crack. The shape of it is also my preferred shape because of the way it kind of fits my knuckles when I'm pushing it through. And I have less of a tendency to press on that back right on my palm, which is very dangerous. That's where all your nerves are. So to hold it, I kind of hold it on the side to slide it, just because that's where my knuckle fits. It's just very nicely shaped. The handle itself, you would not believe the amount of abuse I've put on this chisel since I've gotten it. Banging on the end, it is a maple end, but they have baked it, and I forgot the term that they use for it, but this color is actually the caramelization of the sugars in maple. This is maple. It should be very, very light colored like that, but that's what the caramelization does, and it actually changes the physical properties of the wood to make it incredibly hard and incredibly stable. it's all those little design features. Oh, did I mention this curve right here? Notice how they've got this rounded off and it curves up. My pinky fits that. I mean, it's so comfortable to hold it whenever I'm chipping away, carving away, wasting away work. I mean, it's just, in case you can't tell, I really like this chisel. It just feels like they made it specifically for me. Now, tools like this, of this caliper, they aren't cheap, okay? Yes, you can make a good inexpensive tool, but to go up to that next level just takes a lot more machining. I mean, imagine the tooling they had to do to get those flats on the side and get it perfectly sized this way. The reason why a lot of these are done that way is because they can actually shape it and then grind the sides back to whatever they want. You can't do that on this tool. It's either perfect the first time or it goes into the dumpster. And it's that kind of refinement that justifies the cost. And when you look at the pricing of these things, you got to say to yourself, this is a very inexpensive luxury. I mean, how many times can you say that in your lifetime? And this tool will last my lifetime, even as much as I use it, as long as it doesn't get stolen. So if you ever get a chance to hold one of these, to try them out, I highly suggest you do it. I mean, it's my favorite tool.